Thus, you're effectively lerping between a texture that's moving to another texture that's also moving but slower to create the illusion of movement. Hello everybody and welcome to another tutorial on Organian's puzzle box. So in today's video, we'll be going through something that's been requested of me multiple times in the past. People who want to create animated nebulas in Unreal Engine. Now, this is not the ray marching technique that you probably have seen other people do. So these are not volumetric nebulas. They are 2D static HDRIs, which is building upon a previous tutorial that I've done in which we were making an HDRI cube map for Unreal Engine. So please watch that tutorial as it is the foundation for this second one. This one will show you specifically how to animate those textures to create an effect in which that you've got progression like they're moving, but you also got things such as, you create an explosion like the one you're seeing right now. This particular effect has been achieved by employing flow maps. The material is quite, I would say, inexpensive in that regard, but it does use quite a bit of texture memory due to whatever textures you're going to use. So that's really very dependent on you. This is not a tutorial showing you how to create an HDRI or a cube map. I have covered that to some extent in the previous tutorial. This one is purely to show you how to set up the flow map set up in the material in order to be able to animate your nebulas or cosmic sort of effects. But yeah, let's not delay it any longer. Let's begin the tutorial. But please first make sure to just have a quick look at this a short promo for my products if you want to support me. Please consider going on Patreon, Gumroad, or ArtStation to purchase projects such as this one. This one is particular is now live. You can buy it for the price of a coffee if you want to, or you can join the YouTube membership or the Patreon membership and just get all my projects really for one price. But yeah, without any further delays, let's just move on to the promo and then let's move on to the tutorial. If you want to support the Organians Puzzle Box channel, please consider purchasing one of my projects from ArtStation or Gumroad. It's literally the price of a coffee, and it gives you a fully fledged space project to use in Unreal Engine, and there's also some Blender options in there as well. Also, you can become a Patreon member or YouTube member, and then you get access to these projects anyway. So consider that maybe if you want to support me. But let's not waste any more time and let's begin. Okay, I've got my newest scene now available, so I've obviously opened it. I just want us to explore a little bit of what's going on. So we've got the planet here with the rings, which is part of the project, and then the space station. But the nebula itself is I've got like a sphere. So it's very reminiscent of the tutorial that we did before. Actually, you will have to watch that tutorial in order to further grasp the concept of what we're doing right here. So we've got a static texture in the background, as you can see around there. Then we have this one that's moving, and this is controlled by certain material parameters. If we have a look into the material, so I've called this material underscore skybox underscore flow. And this is the material itself. We're going to go through what this means, but the tutorial that explains how to create HDRIs for Unreal Engine already shows you how to make this node structure and then this star generator structure and link them together in order to get the, as I said, the static skybox in the background. Actually, if I drag the normal material into this sphere, this is the normal skybox that we used. So this is the one that we got. I mean, this is part of the tutorial that I did when I created the HDRI skybox. So that's in that tutorial, which is linked in the description below, you'll be able to learn how to make not this particular nebula, but how to make the setup in order to have HDRIs into it. So this can work for clouds. It can work for anything that you want to cover your atmosphere, basically. So the other material The one that we've got the animated one is this one. So actually, if I double click the material instance, what you'll notice is that this is actually a true camera driven sort of setup, node setup for Cubemaps, which is an XYZ. So you need to use XYZ for this. You can't use X and Y only. So we've got a few settings in here, which again are available in the project files. You've got the colors and the texture that you want to use. So this is the alpha and the color, and I'm just going to put like a skip into the video, like you can go to a different chapter, because I just want to go very quickly through what these settings do. And if you already know and you want to skip to the next step, that's fine. So basically, you've got this is where you put the alpha and the color, and what that does, the alpha will hide the area in which these stars can show up. So if it's white over here, so if the alpha is white in this particular case, then these stars will not show up. And you'll notice that if I, for example, use a different texture in that um, alpha in there. So if I, for example, drag in this texture, which is different, which is a black and white texture, I put that on, go back into the scene, and now some of the star sort of formations will have changed. I'm particularly sure that this is very visible or not. Because as I said to you, you're doing it in here, and it's just, well, it can have varying degrees of effect. But that's if I double click it, so stars will not show up very commonly in this area, but they will definitely show up around where there's no more white. So that's really how this works. And then you've got some other settings in here for a color extra cube map. So what this means is that the normal cube map that you're loading in here is the one that's moving, and this one is static. So within our scene, you have the animated cube map, but then you also have the static one, the one that's not animated at all, the one that's in the background. And also, I've got settings to rotate it. So if I let me just take this material out for a second and we can see the space scene at the same time. If I go over to the rotation, you will notice that I can actually rotate that cube map, so then it shows up in a different place. So you can load any other cube map in that sort of particular scene if you want to. Now, if you press Alt 8 on the keyboard, this is the performance. So as you can see, the planet is the one that takes the most amount of performance in the scene, in terms of, it's pretty bad. But then you've got the shader complexity for the nebulas. It's not great, but it's somewhere around here, right? Okay, so let me just press Alt 4 to go back into that view mode. Obviously here you can load again an HDRI. Then you've got the flow direction. So the flow direction is about the cube map at the top. So what this does, if you click over here, you can see I've got 303. So if I put that to 0 and 0, then our cube map stops animating. If I put that to 1, then it will animate on the, so I believe this is the x-axis, and then this will be the Y and this will be the Z. So if I put 1 there as well, now you'll see in the nebula going, sort of like coming towards us. If you increase these values, so let's say a 5 and 5, then this will make it go a lot more, but then it also distorts the texture to the point where it doesn't look all right anymore. But I guess with camera trickery, you can get some really nice effects using this. It's one of the things that I've used in my cinematics. Okay, so I've also got a flow map here. So I'm going to show you the material, right? Let's just go and have a look at the material a little bit. The flow map, so this is the new setup that's on top of what we did in the previous tutorial where we were setting up the HDRI. So what happens here is you've got a texture. So particularly, I've got this as a material parameter. So it's this texture over here. It doesn't matter. I mean, the texture that I'm using, by the way, I'm using this one because I like how it works with that nebula. But you can experiment. You can actually add the nebula itself, and I'll show you in just a second. You can add the texture of the nebula itself into the flow map, and then that changes how the flow map functions. But you can see it also creates some of this sort of weirdness around it. So you could probably use the black and white version of that, and that helps it a little bit more. But you can see the flow is not that great when you're using the same texture. So I generally end up using a different kind of texture for the flow map. So I've just now added another alpha. I'm not sure why the performance and it dropped so hard. I think it's thinking about something. Yeah, there we go. So I've now put another one. So this is how this is being affected. So you're gonna have to experiment with different flow maps. You can even use a flow map generator. I've actually I'm not sure. I've got a software somewhere that can generate flow map. I'll put a description in the I'll put it in the description below. But this section for me works the greatest, and this is also available. It's part of the project if you choose to buy it and download it from there. We also got a section where you can put different textures of stars. Again, they don't have to be stars. They can be something else. They can be other HDRIs as well that will then be masked by the black and white texture from up here or the black and white texture from over here. Okay. So that's that. Now let's just have a look at the material that we used in the previous tutorial where we set up the nebula. And the HDRI that was meant to show you how to create cube maps, basically. Well, not how to create cube maps, but how to use cube maps. And we'll just go through a quick breakdown of that as well before proceeding to the actual part of creating the material flow. So to start off, I'm using a coordinate system where we use a camera vector. This allows this texture, so if you go into the scene, you will never reach the edge of the sphere, right? Now I can click the sphere and press F to go outside of the sphere. But as you can see, because that's how big the sphere is, I can't actually, the material shows in this particular way. Now, if I increase my speed to try to get closer to the sphere, let me just try and do that even more. So now I'm getting very close. I'm getting close to the sphere. That's literally, I'm getting close to the surface of the sphere. Because I'm using a camera vector, it's like entering through a portal here. And once we enter the sphere, that's it. It now encompasses our entire field of view. So now I'm coming out of the sphere and now I'm going back in. And that's what the camera vector does. That's why I'm using that. Now, part of so if you got the camera vector, I'm using then a transform vector from world space to local space, and then I'm multiplying it by -1. If you don't do that, then UVs will be distorted. All of this connects to every one of the UVs of the every cube map. So as you will see in the other tutorial, which I strongly recommend that you go through, it will show you how to set up all of this. So we're loading a 2D color text, a color texture, not 2D, a vector, a linear color, a cube map texture. We're loading that into a texture sample, and I'm doing it this way so that then I can create this into a parameter, and I can add whatever textures I want with the material instance. And I am extracting the blue, green, and red channel of this texture. And then, because I'm trying to have a controller over that, so I'm multiplying it by 1, which means basically that the red, the green, and the blue is going to be normal value. It's just a value of 1. And if I go in the material instance and start toying with that, then I can increase those values, get more reds, more blues, or greens, or desaturate them. So, get those colors out. Then we're appending them all together into a power node. And again, we then have a power node setting in here, which will then make the texture, the texture darken or lighten to the point where if you probably go below 0.6, you'll start to see a lot of problems with that, like it becomes over exposed. But then if you go above 2, it will start going invisible. The texture is no longer visible. And then this is, I'm using I'm using also desaturation, so you can actually desaturate the colors if you want to have less vibrancy or more vibrancy. And then I am combining these nodes with an alpha. So it's the alpha is generated from the texture itself. So if you want to create an HDRI, you have an HDRI that you want to use, you need to go into a software like Photoshop and then create a black and white version of that, and then just toy with maybe paintbrushes or inverse layers to work out where you want the stars, so the stars that you're seeing over in here, where you want the stars to show and where you want them to be hidden by the alpha of that texture. Now, if I double click this HDRI here and just look at the alpha of it, so this is the texture. Now, wherever the white is the strongest, that's where those stars are going to show up. Now, This in particular, you may want to have stronger gradients here, so it sort of covers them even more. That gives more volume into the scene. It creates the impression that the texture itself has some depth to it. That's the idea behind that. Okay. And we're doing this node setup that, again, you can pause here and copy it so you can see how they're all connected. Yeah. And you'll learn that in that tutorial. And then you're putting them into an add node. So both of these just go into an add node, which then is connected with the star generator, which again, these are textures that are linked. So I'm using two different kind of textures. These textures are a far and a small near star cluster. So you can have two variations of that as well, which again, they've got an intensity number, and also a saturation. So you can color them more or less. If they are colored, if they're just black and white, then that won't really matter. And obviously then you're subtracting. So this is key. Without this node here, the this material wouldn't know that you want to add stars wherever the alpha is black, so as in opacity 0, right? And all of this then gets plugged in into the emissive color. And I'm using the sky atmosphere light disk luminance so that it allows the sun to shine through. Otherwise, the sun would be invisible, but the light would still be coming from that direction. And that's really the breakdown of this material. So for the material skybox with a flow, we've got a few changes done, but the basic setup is the same. I'm just going to show you what those changes are, and then you can be on your merry way to create your own version of this and experiment with it. Now, some of you may not be a fan of this type of tutorial, in the sense of I'm showing you a finished product and then I'm going to go through step by step how I made it and why, and then for you to piece it together. But I find that you will learn more this way than just watching me dropping in nodes and connecting them randomly and not really saying what I'm doing, and I'm just moving very quickly through it. Okay? If you don't like this type of tutorial, then I'm really sorry, but I find that if I make an 1 hour tutorial, nobody will really watch it. If it's under 30 minutes, potentially people will watch it and actually learn something at the end of the day, and then they will also won't be asking me questions in the comment section below, in which they will say, what was that one value added somewhere because I didn't quite get that? And I'm thinking, if you are copying values literally, um, you know, line after line, you are not learning how to create this. You are just copying a process and then just not really enriching your knowledge with this. You probably would have to go through it a couple of times yourself alone after that in order to fully understand it, but you probably won't do that either. So let's begin. Right, now the difference between this material, which is the one with the flow, the one with the animation, and this material, right, is that the flow material has this sequence here, which is a new sequence. It also has this sequence, which is another one. Okay. And this is very optional, by the way. We're going to go through this last, only if you're interested. But this is not, the extra cube map is not needed if you don't want that. The star generator is the same. And then what you're seeing here is flow 1 and flow 2. Now, flow 1 and flow 2 are literally the same thing. There is no difference between, actually, there cannot be any difference between flow 1 and flow 2, because they have to be a copy of the same thing. Because what you're doing here, when you're looking at this animation, basically you've got flow 1, which is the same HDRI as flow 2, but flow 1 is moving while flow 2 is also moving. So the texture in flow 1 and flow 2 is moving, but they're overlapping and then switching. Flow 2 is behind flow 1 in movement. Thus, you're effectively lerping between a texture that's moving to another texture that's also moving but slower to create the illusion of movement. And the devil's in the details here, by the way, because the tweaking of these values can vary between whatever HDRIs you're using. And what I mean by this is that if you look at if you look over here, right, it's so much more noticeable that you're just switching between two flow maps. And by the way, I know that the textures here may not look amazing when they're transitioning, but when you render, for example, this is why this is much more useful in cinematics. When you render with 64 anti-aliasing passes, this will look a lot better. And even in game, if you turn down the value of the flow, so in the that would be in the material. Sorry, let me just double click the material flow instance, which is over here. If you look here and put this to 1, for example, then that is going to be less noticeable, but obviously also the animation is going to be less noticeable, but that effect is less noticeable now of the distortion. Okay, so going back into the material. So we've got flow 1, which, as I said, is the first texture as a second texture. It's using the texture color and the texture alpha, and then you've got texture color and texture alpha as well, and they're literally the same color. Because I'm using T color, T alpha here, and I'm also using it over here, whenever you change it in the material instance, as in over into here, it will change it for both because you're using the same parameter name, which is quite neat. Now, if you followed the tutorial for the HDRI setup, you already should have this done, okay? This setup in here. What you're noticing here where it says connect for movie sequence animation control, this is a collection parameter. I've got another tutorial that goes for how to use those, so there's no point in me going through this, but if you want to use the settings of this material in sequencer, you have to use a collection parameter. So let's just ignore that. That's not important. Just watch the other tutorial if you want to know how to use that. It's not actually in use right now in here anyway. So what we're doing, this is the mapping coordinates that we also used in the other material over here. But I don't have this multiply node anymore. Instead, I've got the transform vector connecting into the UVs already. Okay, so this is connecting into the UVs of these textures. So for the stars, just like in the previous material, it connects straight into the UV of the stars. So that's fine, as you can see that. It's going straight there. But for the textures, it goes through this node setup first. So let's have a look what that is. Again, this is for the material sequencer. You don't need to worry about that. So the first thing, you would be adding a flow map. So this is just a texture. Again, I've turned this into a parameter, and I can add whatever linear color I want. By the way, if you're trying to use anything but HDR textures, this will not work. It will give you an error, and I can show you that. If I go into, I'm just going to pick a random texture from here and just drop it in. You'll notice you've got an error saying that the parameter found texture 2D requires texture cube, because this texture that I've added is not a HDRI, it's not a cube map, so it won't work. And this is because I am using a camera vector. That's why vector, it's got coordinates, right? It's got more than 2 coordinates. Right, so this goes into the flow map. And I've turned this into a parameter, so then I can just drop in textures. Again, that's simple. Like if this was, I don't think you can convert it back, to be honest. But if you add in here a texture sample and you right click it, you've got convert to parameter, and then you can name this to whatever you want. In my case, I've named it the flow map. And if you do that, then that will then show up over into the material instance in here with whatever you've named it, so then you can just switch it on the fly whenever you want. And that's also useful if you're going to create a skybox blueprint. Okay, so we've got this, and we're connecting it to a constant bias scale, and I've put this to a minus 0.5 and 2. Now, this is very important to use these specific settings, otherwise it will mess the flow map itself. But again, I would experiment with those settings, but definitely these are the best values that I found minus 0.5 and 2. And you've got this constant bias scale to here as well, and I'm using the same settings. Okay, and this is connecting to a multiply, and this multiply into a texture into a vector four vector constant. So with number 4, press on the keyboard, just left click anywhere in the material, and this will add you this vector, which you can then right click and then convert to parameter if you want, connect it into that multiply, and then start adding some values. The alpha can be at 1. There's no alpha, doesn't do anything. You could probably use the free vector constant, to be honest, for this, because it's the RGB that you care about. It's just RGB will then work as a trajectory for where the flow goes of this texture. So you connect that into the multiply node over here, and then you multiply by 0.25 and then connect it to this multiply, right? And from here, this multiply and add 1 plus this multiply, this entire branch will connect to the first flow map, which is so you once you have the setup from the other tutorial of the HDRI tutorial, you'll copy all of that setup and make another copy of it, right? So two identical copies of that, which ends with the node add between the texture and the alpha of the texture. Okay, so then this multiply from here connects into these two UVs, right? And then you got a flow map time. So this is the one that allows the actual flow motion to occur, the animation. So you use a time vector, um sorry, it's yeah, an input data, a time input data. You connect that to multiply 0.05. Now this can be how quickly it can go. So for me, I've just hard set it to 0.05, but you can experiment with that and maybe do another value, add a parameter maybe to be able to control it. And I'm putting that into a fraction. So if I start previewing the node here, it won't, I don't believe, yeah, sorry. Now let me just preview here. So, no, sorry, I'm not doing this right. Let me just see. I think because I'm loading a texture. Yeah, there we go. So this is just showing how long it takes for the textures to sort of the swap between black, which is one of the textures, and then white, which is the other texture. And because we're using, if we're not using frac, this would happen a lot faster. So what we're doing here is from this multiply, we're connecting it to a fraction and then connecting it to this multiply, which comes straight after the 0.25. This multiply also branches out within this multiply, which is connected to a second frac and an add value of 0.5. This connects to the second flow map and the alpha. So you can see how, I'm just going to leave the screen right over here so you can understand. So the time data connected to multiply 0.05, which allows, which dictates how quickly time passes, um, connects to this fraction, connects to this add node, which connects to another fraction. Both of these then factor into the multiply node. So specifically over here, these three nodes on each side is essentially the same, but this has got a value of 1 and this has got a value of 1.2. Now the value of 1.2 is the distance between the first texture and the second texture before it sort of occurs. So if you put this to maybe 2, then you'll notice that the second texture will fade into view twice as slow as the first one. So you don't want that because then that time is going to be so big. So you want to keep it quite close. So 1.2 for me is quite okay. Now, if you want to add a third texture, you can add a third texture node like this and maybe do a 1.3. So then you've got something coming in from the back as well, thus creating a more not necessarily a seamless transition, but definitely a lot more detail within that. So these nodes, as I said to you, let me just have a look. These nodes, both, so this one and this one connects to the flow one, and this one connects to flow two. Now you'll also notice that in the B sort of part here, there's another connection, and that comes from the camera vector, so from the transform vector. That's I'm using that to connect it to the stars. I'm also using that to connect it to both of the multiplies that then go into each of the flows and also into the extra cube map. Okay, so the fraction, as I said, limits how quickly these would, without this fraction, this texture would switch a lot quicker, and so would the second one. Now the flow map mask fade. Let me just stop the preview. This is connected to an ABS node, and then this. So this entire this whole thing that comes out of this frac from here connects all the way to a lerp node, and the lerp node is between flow one and flow two. So both, so the add node in here that connects the texture, color, and the alpha connects to B, and the other one to A. So the alpha of the lerp of the interpolate node comes from this flow map mask fade. Okay. Now, if we start previewing over here, I'm not sure. Well, you can see the movement right over there. That's what the alpha of the lerp node does. The alpha transitions between one texture to the other. Without this, you wouldn't be able to see that transition. It's very important. Without it just wouldn't work, right? And over in here, I've got an add node. This is just adding the stars because the stars are always there in the background. It's just that the alphas take care of hiding them. Now the stars aren't moving, so if you want to get them to move, then you would have to integrate them within the flow. But because we don't want them to move in this particular case, then they just come after the interpolate node, and then they're connected effectively. You could just connect them right over here, and that would be the end of it. But because I've got this extra cube map here, that's why they're connected this way, and then obviously flowing straight into the material. Now, I hope that wasn't too confusing. Okay. If it was, please join the Discord server and we can further discuss it in there. In which I can just I can send you some snippets of the code if you want to get more information on that. But this is where the magic happens, right? You've got a flow mask fade that's connected to an interpolate node. You've got the flow map time, how quickly that sort of takes over. You've got fraction nodes in the middle to make sure that the value is clamped. And then you've got a flow map that sort of dictates in what direction the the sort of the interpolation happens, right? That's important as well. The extra cube map is, so you can see the transform vector from the camera vector connecting into a position of a rotate about axis node. It's using these values of 0.001 for normalized rotation axis. You've got the cube map rotation parameter, which allows you to select the angle. Now, this is a one. This value is just for the Z axis, but you can break this down in X, Y, Z if you want to. So maybe use like a 3 point to then be able to rotate it. The pivot point is 0 because the actual object that we're trying to rotate the texture around is actually, it's in the center of it is in the world center. And then we're adding both the rotate about axis and the camera vector together. We're normalizing them, and that connects to the texture. So that's the texture cube map, and that's the alpha. And over here, literally the same setup as above where we've got the flows. Literally the same thing copied. And then that's connecting into an add node right before the final add node that connects our sky atmosphere light disk luminance, which allows the sun to shine through the skybox. And then connect it into an emissive color over here. Okay, now you can see we're not using the opacity at all because there's no need to. Our alphas are mimicking a form of opacity. Well, they're not actually mimicking opacity, they're just masking certain areas where part of the textures that we're adding are being ignored. So you can see this material can definitely have an impact on your video memory because we're using quite a few different textures within, and all of these textures are quite big. If we have a look at this one, you can see over here, it's 4K in game, but displayed at 8K. One thing that I would definitely recommend to you is that let me just open one of the HDRIs. So this one in particular, what I want you to notice is that this is using no mib maps at the minute. Okay, if we go back into here, let me just stop the flow. So I'm just gonna put the flow to 0. So now it's no longer moving at all. So you can see it over there. Now, if I go into here and change the mip maps to from texture group, which is the default. So from texture group, it looks like this with no mip maps. I don't know if you can notice this for YouTube, but this is how it looks with no mip maps. And this is how it looks. So I don't know if you notice that, but it just actually blurs a bit. So this is from texture group. Let's go back into the scene. You can see how it looks like. I'm not sure if YouTube allows this, but it's definitely more compressed. But if I go into here and switch it to no mip maps and then go back in here, you can see now that the quality just pops in, right? It looks a lot better. So I would definitely recommend you use Nebula, especially for cinematic renders. But I hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial for today. I hope you have learned something, and I'm hoping you can use that knowledge to now create, amazing space scenes. Just be mindful that you can definitely come on a Discord server and ask whatever questions you may want. There's a community building up over there. I think it's about 200 members now, and still going strong. The Patreon number has also increased. The YouTube membership have also increased. So really, I would like to say thank you to those people who are supporting the channel to remain in its current format, for tutorials coming in every couple of weeks, and also renders and more projects for people to use. I intend to keep everything at a, as I said, the price of a coffee for people to be able to take them and experiment with them and learn from them. I'm also going to provide competitions in which people can win all of my projects in one go. So stay tuned for that on Discord. Some really exciting stuff coming through in the future. I'm working on gravity for planets. So you can land on those planets and also take off from them. And I'm looking at how to generate worlds using something else apart from voxels. So I'm still working into that. Stay tuned to volumetric nebulas, where you will be able to fly through using ray marching techniques. I'm also working on that. And I'm also working on an updated version of my black hole. So again, stay tuned for that as well. Once again, thank you to the community. Thank you guys for the support. Thank you for the patrons and the YouTube members. And I'll see you guys in the next one. So keep flying through space, keep sailing, and yeah, don't give up. You're there.